if you're going to be questioned on anything, you will be questioned probably on just those two items. That is the serious injury or loss of consciousness or property in excess of $500. I don't think that they're going to go into these other points, but I want you to be aware of them. So somewhere in the back of your remote memory, I want you to pay attention to the next several items under accident reporting. The next one is 10 calendar days. If something occurs that meets those first two requirements, then you have 10 days in which to report to the FAA. And there are several different ways you can report, but the easiest one for me to give you is to remember FAA.gov/UAS. In any event, you are not likely to remember that. So I want to caution you that if you ever have an accident, the first thing you're going to say to yourself is, okay, I better find out now who I have to report this accident to. So I don't expect you to memorize that. I don't think you will, even if I asked you to. You just need to be aware that somewhere somebody's going to wait for your report within 10 days. Now, one of the things that comes up is, as we talked about in the first item, called serious injury. And in fact, serious injury is there's a definition out there. There are 6 levels of injury. The 6th level is death. The serious level is 3. And so, in this particular case, level 3 or higher on what is called the abbreviated injury scale, or AIS, would constitute something you'd have to report. So if you're in doubt about whether the injury was serious or not, remember somewhere you learned in this class that you have to get some level 3 injury on the internet. You have to go to the internet and put in level 3 injury, and I'm sure it'll automatically come up with the abbreviated injury scale from the Association for the Advancement of Automotive Medicine. So just remember, when in doubt about serious injury, look up level 3 AIS. And finally, the one that might be required, but likely not, and that is certain accidents that you might encounter might have to be reported to the National Transportation Safety Board. For example, if you ran into an aircraft, right? Either on the ground or in the air. If you ran into an aircraft and substantially damaged it, not only do you need to report the damage to the FAA at FAA.gov/UAS, but you also have to report it to the National Transportation Safety Board. They're the ones that investigate all the accidents involving American aircraft worldwide. So any aircraft accident anywhere, immediately the NTSB sends a team of people to investigate that accident. And then it takes them usually a year to write up a report. And I'm waiting for 2 NTSB reports on 2 friends of mine who died in aircraft accidents within the last couple of months. It'll take them about a year for them to write the final report. We kind of know what happened in both instances, but we're waiting for the definitive answer. That is, they do a tremendous amount of investigation, they do a lot of analysis, and they do a lot of discussion with people who might have been involved, and then they come up with what do they call a probable cause. Probable cause. Pardon? Well, I think that in the case of the glider that came apart in the air, the probable cause was the fact that the wings themselves were probably not assembled correctly. And when he was flying up over the mountains, the wings came apart. They separated in flight. So the probable cause there is something that had to do with assembly. Jacob? Pardon?
Did they interview you?
Yes, by telephone. And my other friend who was coming back from Kansas, we believe that he either had a heart attack or a stroke or he fell asleep in his aircraft, and it slowly and very carefully descended from 12,000 feet and crashed. No, he was in a power plane. He was in a single engine, an old, vintage, beautiful aircraft called a Beechcraft Staggerwing. Staggerwing. That is, there was a biplane, but the wings were not one on top of another. The top wing is more forward than the back wing. Beautiful aircraft. a very, very sought-after vintage aircraft for aircraft owners who like to own old aircraft. And that was one that we all, I mean, certainly we felt bad about Pat, but also on top of that, we know that there are not too many of those stagger wings left in the world, and that one I'm sure was completely totaled. Anyway, we're the topic of crew resource management, and this is something that came up many, many years ago when they discovered, for example, that crews from South America, whether it was from Argentina or Brazil or any of those countries down there, the feeling among the cockpit members was that no one would ever question the captain. It was a Hispanic way of believing in authority, and so there was a tragic accident. There are several of them that were written about by a guy by the name of Malcolm Gladwell. But one of the accidents was the Avianca, and none of the crew members, the co-pilot and the flight engineer, and there was another person sitting in the cockpit as well, questioned the captain about what he was doing and why he was doing it, and why aren't we telling the controllers what we need to tell them in order to land. It was a tragic accident. It's called Flight 52, and cockpit resource management started developing from that, where they're saying, look, the captain is not God. The captain is just another member of the crew, and you have an obligation to question the captain if he happens to be flying the aircraft or performing a maneuver that you know to be unsafe. You have a right not only to question it, but in the event it's necessary, to take the controls from the captain or any crew member that seems to be acting in a way that is unsafe. And the FAA has been stressing cockpit resource management for many, many years now, trying to get people to realize that you just don't want to sit there because you're afraid to tell the captain that he's doing something stupid or wrong or whatever. There have been too many aircraft accidents where it has occurred because no one wanted to question the captain. Jacob?
Wasn't he like an authority?
Yeah, he's an authority figure, and the problem is people were afraid to question it. Now, that just happened, didn't it? The Asiana Airlines, that Boeing 777 that was coming in from Indonesia and landed short at the runway at San Francisco International. Does everybody remember that? It was only, a year ago? Less than a year ago? It was because the two people who were responsible for that aircraft were so high in the level of authority that the other people who were in the cockpit didn't want to question what they were doing. I mean, that's a kind of tragic thing you get into. Fortunately, the American flag carriers are not subject to that anymore, because we know now, and have known for a number of years, that no one is of a higher authority in the cockpit. Everybody is at the same level of authority, and everybody has the same obligation and responsibility to take control of the aircraft if necessary. So I'm a little surprised, but I can see the connection between cockpit resource management or crew resource management and a drone. Because if somebody's operating that drone in an unsafe way, I don't care whether it's somebody that's bigger and stronger than you are and you're standing there as a visual observer, you have the obligation to say something to that person who's controlling it, or if the controller is doing what he wants to do, but the pilot in command is ignoring something that the control person is doing, then you have the right as the visual observer to say, now wait a minute, now that's not right, that's illegal, stop that. So the FAA wants to transfer the concept of safety from cockpit management in aircraft to the idea of flying drones. So we're talking about a culture of safety, and you've got to get that established within your responsibility as pilot in command of a drone operation. You have to be the one to set the tone for the culture of safety. So situational awareness is one of the goals, and that's something that comes up in an aircraft too. If the people on that Asiana Airlines that crashed to San Francisco had been more situationally aware, it never would have happened. Their sink rate on final was way beyond the required sink rate for an aircraft of that size. And even if they had made the runway, they probably would have hit so hard it might have damaged the wings themselves, because their sink rate as they were coming in on final was too excessive. That's one of the reasons why they hit the seawall. I don't know whether you remember that or not, but it couldn't have happened more than a year ago, I think, at least from my weak memory. So anyway, yes.
Did the air traffic control tell them that they're sitting somehow?
No, the air traffic control is in a situation where they cannot tell a pilot how to maneuver the aircraft unless, for example, if an aircraft was coming in and they forgot to put the gear down, they can call the aircraft commander, they can call the pilot and say, hey, your gear's not down, right? What they can't do is they can't say, we think your sink rate is a little too much, because if something happens, if they try to adjust the sink rate and it gets worse, who's going to get the blame? The controller, right? So the controllers have to sort of bite their lip when they see what they think might be an excessive sink rate. But they're just probably sitting there in the control cab hoping that the aircraft makes the end of the runway. So the whole idea is to use all available resources that you can have. And that's one of the questions that we had on the exam, and that is, are you responsible for notifying everybody in your crew all the information that you've amassed as pilot in command? And the answer was yes. You are required to notify everybody in the crew who was in the crew for the drone operation. You're required to tell them everything you know about the operation that day, including weather, including obstacles, including people that might be in the distance, whatever. And the other idea is that you're not just limited to 3 crew members, by the way. Don't think that you only can have 3, because, for example, if you were going to do an orchard and you wanted to make sure that you did it exactly, and you didn't have the kind of drone that could make its way around that orchard, you might want to station a person at each corner of the orchard so that they can observe the drone coming in and be able to keep visually observing it. If the trees are high enough, you'd have to stand pretty far back in order for you to see that drone once it disappeared over the top of the orchard. So keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to limit yourself to 3 people in a crew. One of the things that the FAA continues to bring up, and that is pilots or drone operators that have bad attitudes. And one of the bad attitudes is, hey, I'm a big guy, I can do whatever I want to. Or I don't have to listen to authority. Or it's never going to happen to me. Or I'm macho, so I can do exactly as I please. Those are attitudes that are identified by the FAA, and they're attitudes that if you spot that attitude, if you don't think you can change the attitude, you get rid of that crew member. And that means that if you walk onto a site where you are going to be pilot in command and you think maybe the drone operator, that is the one with the control box, has that kind of an attitude, if it was me, I would turn right around and walk away from it, because I don't think you can get that person to change, and I'm not sure you would be able to find somebody, especially if he owned the drone, find somebody to operate the drone instead of that guy or that girl, for example. So you have to be aware of the different kinds of attitudes, and there are questions, I know, on the private pilot exam for aircraft where they actually ask a question that has to do with the attitude that you might be faced with if you're dealing with somebody who is in your crew. So be aware that you may be asked to answer a question that has to do with the attitudes of invincibility or anti-authority or machoism. Those are 3 of the 5 or 6 words that they use. I will provide that list for you later on, maybe tomorrow or the next day. But 3 of the ones that are most important are the ones I've listed here: macho, anti-authority, and invulnerability. My guess is if you're going to get a question on crew attitudes, it'll be one of those 3. So here's the Avianca Flight 52. This is a typical. This is the exact kind of an airplane with colors and all, that wound up crashing on Long Island as a result of the crew failing to agree and then failing to notify the controllers of exactly the problem they had, which was that they were running out of fuel. And this is what happened to it. There were a number of people that survived the crash, but unfortunately not everyone. And it had more to do with the authority level in the cockpit than it did the fact that they just ran out of gas. They ran out of gas because of the attitude in the cockpit. And that's what you don't want to encounter when you are responsible for drone operations. You don't want to encounter that kind of an attitude. I don't know. Okay, aeronautical decision making is another concept that the FAA has been pushing for years for we pilots. They want to be sure that any decisions we make are decisions where we have taken into account all of the possibilities that you can encounter. So I'll give you an example. Every time I train a student and he becomes a licensed pilot, I tell he or she, and I've had probably 10 ladies or maybe 12, something like that, and the rest guys, I tell them, look, no matter where you are in your life, no matter how many years from now, if you're ever going to take a flight and you're not sure about whether you should go or not go, call me. First of all, I probably have been to nearly every airport in the state of California. I probably have encountered nearly every weather condition you can imagine because I was born and raised and flew in the Midwest. And I've flown all over the United States from coast to coast and in bad weather and good weather. So I can advise them, and they do it. I usually get maybe a call or two a month from people who I've known for years, and they're going to be flying, say, from here to Denver, and they want to know information about what's the best route to go to Denver to stay away from the high mountains. Where's the worst turbulence? What time of year should I go? You know, that kind of thing. And so I provide that information. Well, what they're doing is they're taking advantage of all the information available to them, including me as their former flight instructor. So I make that promise. I will never, ever charge them for anything that I can help them with when it comes to their decision-making about being safe in flight. The whole idea is having complete knowledge of the situation in which you find yourself or in which you intend to go. And usually when I provide information to these people, I would say 95% of the time it turns out to be exactly correct, even though they might be a little scared of maybe doing it or not afraid or concerned about, whether or not I'm giving them the right information. When they come back, they'll almost always tell me, yep, it happened exactly the way you said. And whether it's according to weather or turbulence or the best route to follow or how to cross the mountains safely or how to land in crosswinds or how to land in small airports they've never been in before. Because in addition to most of the airports in the state of California, I have been to hundreds of them around the United States, anywhere from O'Hare Airport to Miami International, as well as the East Coast. So aeronautical decision-making is really important. And then it's not only you gathering the information, but it's also communicating that to the rest of the people in the crew. And this is sort of common sense, isn't it? Because if you have information about the flight, about the drone operation, you want to make sure that everybody that's connected with you as a crew has that same information. You don't want to keep anything from somebody, no matter whether it has anything to do with weather, obstacles, people, problems with the drone. No matter what it is, they need to know. And even if it's somewhat depressing news, like we can't fly today, they're all out there and they have all the equipment and the drone's ready to go, and you say, no, we can't fly today. You're required to do that. That's your responsibility. And again, we go back to that crew resource management idea, the macho anti-authority and vulnerability, and you're talking about any attitude that would compromise safety or that would disrupt the team approach to flying drones. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to allow anybody in your crew to disrupt what you consider to be good teamwork that relies on safety to be the guiding principle of your operation. Safety. I do that with my students in aviation. I do that with my biennial flight review pilots that I give reviews to. I compromise the fact, I tell them that the major factor in your life should be safety when you're flying. All right, that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions about what we've just covered?